seconds before it actually really kicks in. Are you going to hold up a picture of your driver's license, Jay?
No, I don't have an actual license yet. Do you want me to move my camera over?
Sure, if you want to. I mean, yeah. I can move you over a little bit. Boop. There we go. Whoops. Shaking you all over the place now. Shake and bake. All right, so we are live. What's up, everybody? My name's Indy, and the gentleman sitting next to me is Mr. Overstressed Jay Powell that doesn't sleep anymore. And this is Indie Game Business. Today, we have Raj hold on, I can say
you
it.
had it a minute ago.
I know. Raj Rajkotia with us, and he's hanging out, and he's going to give us some learnings, is what he's going to do.
So, yeah, I met Raj a couple of weeks ago, and he's got some really cool, interesting stuff going on in terms of a new way for indie studios to acquire users and do marketing and all this wonderful stuff. So we invited him on the show to talk about that and the indie situation and the indie opportunities in India. There we go. And a lot of stuff along the way too. So Raj, welcome. We're gonna start where we always start, and tell us how you got into the industry and walk us through your career up to this point.
Sure. So thank you, Jay and team, Indy team, for having me. So I've been in US almost 24 years, but first 12 years, I would say, was in East Coast doing mostly fintech. So the fintech is my passion that I had for first 12 years of my career. But then I slowly and gradually transitioned to LA market, and I've been in Los Angeles, Santa Monica / Malibu area for almost 12 years. And in that area, I obviously, it's a lot of entertainment, a lot of gaming companies out here. And I entered the gaming companies through an engagement with Riot Games. Riot Games, when I joined, it was during early days, there were, I think, barely 300 people or so. And the way they grew through online PC side of it, and also esports and various different elements, it was very fascinating. So that was how I entered into the gaming. I love gaming now. I've been a hardcore gamer now for almost 10 years now.
Yeah, I noticed your League of Legends shirt you had on as well.
Yeah, it's a personalized League of Legends shirt with my unbeatable Raj as my summoner name engraved in it.
Awesome. So I know you've got some data you want to get started with. Let's go ahead and pull up that presentation that you had, and let's go through that first, and then we'll get into questions and all that sort of stuff. And while he's doing that, I'll remind everybody that next week we have the Indie Game Business virtual business matchmaking event that is merged with the Meet to Match formerly on-site event in San Francisco, but since the US EU ban on travel, everything's online. And so you've got 700 plus companies, and the meeting slots are now opened up 24 hours a day for 5 full days. So if you don't want to sleep, you could theoretically do 240 meetings next week. I wouldn't recommend that, though. If you don't have a ticket yet, remember we cut prices on everything by 50% to help folks with, that got a little bit cash strapped and hosed from GDC. And you can go to our site, indiegame.business, and get links to get your ticket. If you don't have the link for the discount code is IndieDevs, INDIEDEVS, and you'll be good to go. And I'll post this up in chat and let you get started, Raj.
Okay, thank you, Jay. Yeah, so I instead of going through the typical slide by slide presentation, I really wanted to just give a brief overview of what the indie state is. So I've been talking to a lot of indie developers over the last 5+ years, and one of the common theme that I'm seeing for many of the indie games that have survived after 5 years or they have shut down is number one thing is on the marketing front and also scaling users. So they need game users. That's one thing. That's number one issue that I've heard from those indie game developers. And when they talk about scaling, they want to get profitable users. So I was talking to a few guys in Santa Monica a couple days ago, and they were saying that acquiring users might be something that people have a lot of companies do that, but what they want to do is really have that lifetime value of a user or a profitable user. So that's something that it's a very common problem, as we know in the industry. And then they need to show this user growth for the next level of funding, because many indie studios, after 2, 3, 5 years, right, they pretty much, if they don't show the growth, if they don't have the user base, they are shutting down. So this is where I found this niche problem that many of us, and I put us in the category of indie developers, face with. So this is the key problem statement that we are addressing, right? And I have some industry experience that I'm going to share that may be relevant for this conversation.
Sorry, I had a guest jump into my office. I had to mute myself. So, I mean, this is something that it doesn't just affect mobile developers. It affects it affects any kind of developers in any games. So what are, some of the most basic things that you're seeing being done to solve it? And then where are you and your team getting involved even deeper to help the indie devs overcome this situation?
Yeah. So one of the key things that basic level, right? So we work with few indie game developers, and we've quickly found out that for acquiring users, especially in the developed countries, whether it is US or /Canada, it is expensive. We also tried the EU route, and EU route was also relatively expensive. So we looked at the cost of user acquisition. So it ranges anywhere from $4 to $5. That was the cost of user acquisition. And then the area that also was, okay, there are so many, not only mobile games, but on the PC side or even on the console side, and even some of the emerging technologies on AR and VR. It's the higher the value chain, the higher expensive it is. So that's something that we realize after talking to many different growth areas or the companies. So then what we decided, and I'm going to share the next screen, and this is overwhelming, but I'll share it at a much direct solution level. So we looked at many of the emerging markets. We looked at, for example, China is one of the emerging or well-developed market for the gaming side. We looked at EU, especially like a UK side. We looked at some of the Russian sites that we can get some good user base out there. Belarus was another country that we looked into. And after going through several different countries, we found out that we want to concentrate on a country that's still emerging, still there is lack of content, and the potential is huge. So we, and also coming from India, especially myself, 24 years ago, that's something that I felt that there is a potential out in that market. So I studied the market extensively. And then there are a lot of news articles that I can share after this presentation about why India's mobile growth or the rise of esports mobile, or even just the largest smartphone emerging market is growing, especially in India. It's now the second largest smartphone user base. So what we after analyzing that, we found indie developers, especially if they want to get a user, and these are some of the stats that we can easily share, a cost of user acquisition was around 7 cents per user. Yep. So it was 7 cents per user for a cost of acquisition, And then the immediate ROI after 3 months was around $40, $50. Right, so based on in-game purchases, based on some of the ad revenue that we were able to capitalize on. So between those two, the $40, $50, and then the lifetime value, assuming they stay with the game for at least a year, you're looking at $4 to $5 for a user. So based on the pure numbers for the indie side, to me it was a no-brainer. So when I talk to indie game developers, literally they say, okay, let's evaluate the game, let's figure out it's a right fit for the Indian market, and then let's deploy it. So that's one of the key metrics that we quickly realize it's far more rewarding. And then the second element that we also looked at was how much does it cost to bring the game to India, right? Apart from just doing the basic marketing that can be as low as $5,000 a month, or it can go as high as you want, the reward or the break-even point can be achieved within 2 to 3 months, right? So that's something that we also did some stats on that. And there is also an industry reference, so it's not just coming out of just thin air, all these numbers, right? Where we looked at PUBG's model in India and how PUBG was able to scale with the number of downloads and the revenue that it was generated by PUBG. And then we also looked at Call of Duty. That's another one. We looked at Clash of Clans and several different games, right? And even with Dota 2 and then League of Legends is one of the products that we are targeting right now. So all those products have tremendous growth potential in India.
So, and I was over in India late last year, and the first thing that I noticed, especially coming from the West, is like that there's virtually no PC and console market at all. It's all mobile phones. Given that the cost of user acquisition is so low, because that's a ridiculous, drop from $4 or $5 down to 7 cents. But why do you think this hasn't grown and more companies aren't, capitalizing on this right now?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. So I believe it's just awareness. So the more, and that's one of the things that I'm doing right now. Obviously, I want to podcast with you, Jay. But overall, the awareness doesn't exist. And then when I talked to a few other past people that have tried it, they tried to bring. They were trying to bring the games that were not a good fit. And they also many times what people do, they just discount it out. By nature, Indians are non-violent people, so the PUBG kind of a game won't even be successful. So, like I talked to a few investors and even the game developers 2 weeks ago, and they were saying that, we didn't realize that, and they were trying to evaluate the market 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and before PUBG phenomena, they were just discounting the entire market by saying, the game has to be more chess-based, or that it has to be more fun-based or learning-based, rather than a first-person shooter game, because they never thought that first-person shooter game would be as popular as the typical mindset that people thought. So PUBG was one of the key, I would say, game that pretty much changed many people's perception. And to me, that's where the market is untapped. There are certain games that are going to be super successful. PUBG, obviously, Call of Duty are just the action games, but then there are strategy games. Then there are also poker-based games or the card-based games that we believe are going to be super successful. And the more the content goes there, the more it becomes successful. And this is not on just the gaming side, right? Netflix is investing billions of dollars, right, with making some Indian content, not only for US market, but also for Indian market. So is companies like Disney and many other big enterprises. So India is just to me, it's just a emerging market that's going to explode soon.
So what types of games, now that it's been proven that, yes, shooters do work, but what other types of games are best suited for the market?
Yeah, so based on our industry analysis and talking to actual gamers, right, going to colleges and our team in India, that is constantly evaluating the opportunities and socializing many of the components. They are constantly trying to get the user feedback, gamer feedback, college feedback, younger generation feedback. And what they say is the card-based games are super popular. Then there are strategy games that can be super popular. So in US context, something like Clash of Clans or poker, right? So there's an Indian version of poker called Rummy, which is a basic poker game. So that's I believe number 2 or number 3 in the most popular game around download right now. So those games are highly popular. And then the other one is just the word of friends, and then you have even Farmville type of games that would be very popular.
Hit the wrong button. I was trying to pull something up there. So, how are you? You've got a good solution to getting in there and helping developers acquire users, because there's more to it than just the Indian market. I mean, being able to acquire users cheaply is going to help with soft launches and building KPIs and bug fixing, balancing, all that sort of issue. How is it that your company is going about helping these developers grab all these users?
So what we do is first is the basic assessment, right, which is a fit level assessment. We do so obviously myself in US and many of the team members that we have out here, partners that help us do assessment. The assessment includes, okay, let's evaluate your game. Does it need localization? In many cases, there is no need for localization because the target market that we are trying to get users or the gamers are mostly English-speaking users, right? So there is no need for any of the localization element. There might be a few tweaks here and there with the local currency that we have to show in terms of your virtual currencies. But apart from that, there is very little localization that needs to happen. So we do that evaluation as if there is a right fit, then the next step is we looked at how much scale you're looking at. So based on your business performance metrics, the game performance metrics, if you're looking at 1,000 MAUs, for example, then the cost obviously is much lower. If you're looking at like 100,000 MAUs, right, in the next 3 months, or what is your time frame, whether it's 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, based on your time frame, then we say, okay, this is the X amount of funding and marketing dollars that you need for being successful. And then everything is performance based. That's a key metrics that we share and we tell the indie developers. We have also an option for even revenue. In many cases, we subsidize the initial upfront cost by subsidizing the investment by just doing a revenue share. So that's another option that we present to the indie developers. Ultimately, the more the developers are successful, also personally, obviously, I want to make sure that they are successful, so we can be successful. So there's a mutual win-win situation in this context.
So let's jump over to the esports side as well.
Yeah, and you can go ahead and turn your camera back on too if you want.
Okay.
What are the when I was over there, they were doing some of the championships for League of Legends, CS:GO, and I didn't see a PUBG one, but that could have easily just overlooked it. I mean, what are the big esports? What's the opportunity for esports in India right now? And are there titles that you can see that are starting to, make headway into that? Because globally, everybody talks about esports and esports and esports, but at the end of the day, it's still based around like 5 or 6 main games. What's it like, in India? Are there other titles that people should be looking at or thinking of in the coming months?
Yeah. So India, there are a couple of things you can do, right? So one is looking at the big, right? Obviously, like PUBG or even League of Legends or even let's say Call of Duty. Those are the bigger titles where the monetization part of esports is around teams. So one is the teams that are competing at a global level. That are also emerging. You can get it at a much cheaper level compared to like the US team where you have to spend a couple $1 million, right, or even more of that dollar spend that you may end up doing. So that's one area is the team thing. The second area that we target, that something that people are also aware of, is the brand sponsorship, because it's such an emerging market. You get a lot of brand sponsorship, whether it's from Audi, from Pepsi, or Red Bull, right, or even Rockstar. Those kind of drinks, you get tremendous amount of sponsorship revenue that esports gather. And on the game title side, there is this internal competition. If it's a right platform, if it's a right way of executing, there are a lot of small hubs. It's not like the PC ban in South Korea, but it's more like a social activity where you have a couple hundred people that gather in the mall, and they do some kind of a local activity for participating into a tournament where there might be a big success on that front. A perfect example would be something like what Dream 11 is, one of the company that does mostly on the IPL side, which is the Indian Premier League. On that front that people do. But then there are a lot of other small companies, especially for your audience, indie developers, is something that they can do at a more of a localized way, where you can run a competition and you can easily do a break even. So that's the key thing that I want to focus on, is like, especially for indie, any investment you do, the goal is to either break even or exceed the revenue.
So for those local competitions, are they PC based or is it still mostly mobile?
So it's mostly mobile, right? So that's the cultural or smartphone based. It's, I would say 95% is it's mobile.
All right. So how does an indie team, either in the US or in Europe, Middle East, go about getting involved in the Indian market, especially the Indian esports market?
So one would be, and I'm not trying to sell myself, but one would be finding a partner like ourselves, right? So Next Gen TM is one of the partners that you can partner with, but there are a few other companies too. So it's not just us in the marketplace, but finding a local partner that has both US expertise and Indian expertise would be one of the key successful metrics, because now you're dealing with a US company with US regulations, and it's something that you're protected by. So that's one route to go about. The other one is that you can technically take a smaller risk and set up your shop by yourself, right? So everything, unlike China or many other countries, a US entity can operate in India much easily with the right structure, with the right legal setup. They can much easily set up their operation and test the market. But to me, the low risk item would be finding a partner and test it out with either a revenue based model or a performance based model, where you are taking a very minimal risk for a maximum reward. Which is what, if you think about like what Riot did, right? I mean, this is coming as an ex-Rioter. This is coming from my personal experience, like partnering with Garena, for example, or what Garena did, or Tencent, right? When they were almost like PUBG technically was an indie, right? So they found companies like those to test this emerging Asian market, and it was mostly they did some kind of revenue share, and ultimately it became a huge success for everyone.
So how is the mobile market split between iOS and Android? Is it I mean, I would assume it's mostly Android.
That's correct. Yeah. So I would say, speaking, I would say close to 90% is Android. less than 10% is iOS. So, but go ahead.
While we've been talking, I pulled up App Annie and I'm looking at the top charts in India overall, and in games. And one, obviously enough, on the iOS side, the the pandemic game is number one across the board. But when you switch over to Android, it's a whole different ballgame. PUBG's up there, and then there is an action title from Singapore. There's who's that? Coin Masters from Israel. There's some, native Indian games. Then Japan is a much more global spectrum, and the pandemic game isn't anywhere near the top of the list when you switch it. So there's a big difference between what people are buying on iOS and what people are buying on Android. And if you're looking at the market, you need to definitely pay more attention to the Android side than you do the iOS side. It's interesting that there's that big of a difference in the first place. All right, so if you're out there, if you're listening, if you have questions for Raj, anything along the lines of user acquisition or, the market in India or what you need to be doing in the US and Western areas to take advantage of this too, pop them in chat. We've got Restream open, and so we're seeing everybody's chat everywhere. Ask a question and we'll get it answered for sure. We got a lot of people on YouTube today. That's interesting. So from what you're hearing, and I know you're in California, you're not in India, and we can look at this from California too. Obviously, everything right now is the coronavirus. What are you seeing in California, and then what are you hearing in India along the lines of how this is going to affect gaming and esports in general?
Yeah, so I think this can be a big opportunity or a mind shifter too, because traditionally what I've seen, and again, I'm just using my personal experience here, I always prefer in-person meetings. I prefer doing whiteboarding session with the developers or the game developers. And there were a lot of in-person conversations that I always had. With the coronavirus situation, obviously things are shifting, and now people are kind of testing the water right now by saying, okay, let me see if I wanted to do the game dev in India, or if I wanted to try out the service model or even the esports model, can I do it remotely? And can I set up a virtual esports arena where I can have thousands of people watching and streaming? So in essence, it's something that people are now more open to. And literally this week, I got 3 calls from indie developers saying that, yeah, we have traditionally not done outsourcing or tapped into the Indian market. Are you something that you're open to, and can we try out with 1 or 2 developers? So I'm getting a lot of traction on that because of the coronavirus situation.
Well, I mean, we're seeing it too. We've got the event next week, and we're quickly approaching triple the ticket sales that we had for the last event, simply because everything is going online, and we've got some some other opportunities, and we've had phone calls too from other events, and they're like, okay, so tell us about this online thing. And I'm like, oh, we've been doing it for a year, so it's something that we're used to and we're accustomed to. But that's a question that I got asked, by a newspaper this week. It's like, how does this affect esports? And I got the impression that they thought I was going to say it was going to be a huge hit and it was going to cost people a lot of money. But the reality is, I think this is an opportunity for esports more than anything else, because now people are going to have more free time. And then I asked the woman that I was speaking with, and I said, do you commute to work? And she said, yeah. And I said, how long does it take? She said, 30, 45 minutes. I said, well, okay, there you go. Now you have an extra hour and a half in your day. How are you going to fill that? And so I think, as bad as all this stuff is going around, this is actually an opportunity for a lot of companies in esports.
That's so true. Yeah, esports gaming, right? Because now people are a lot more willing to talk about work from home situation, right? And if you're talking from work from home, essentially you have remote workforce. Now your remote workforce can be in US or can be in any part of the world, right? So that's where the mindsets are opening up.
We had somebody just ask on YouTube, does esports get affected? But all right, so one of the ways that it could be affected, especially in India, you're saying everybody gathers in these malls to play. Obviously, on-site events are going to get hit. But,
that's correct. Yeah.
How much does that factor into, because we've been doing esports for 15, 20 years. I mean, I first heard about and got involved in esports when StarCraft came out and Korea just went absolutely crazy over StarCraft. It's not like this is new to us. We've been playing online forever. And there was an article this morning talking about how the Italian telecoms are getting hit on bandwidth right now because everybody's at home, everybody's quarantined. So they're watching Netflix, they're streaming movies, and they're playing games. And so it's one of those things. It's I think this is going to be a good thing.
Yeah.
And I completely just lost my train of thought. That happens quite a bit. So I'm just trying to think through some of this because it's such an opportunity. I mean, it's 7 cents. I just can't get over that. And so that's the big problem that developers and publishers see right now. We frequently recommend indie devs do not get involved in free-to-play game. Don't make a free-to-play game and then go, we're going to find a publisher for it, because the cost for acquisition in the US is more than you're going to see from the lifetime of that player. But now it kind of gets flipped on its head. So and we heard similar numbers like this from the MENA region, from Middle East and North Africa. Once the players get it, and I mean once the developers get it and they release it in India and they start getting their KPIs in, how well do those KPIs transfer to other markets? I mean, are players more likely to spend in India versus they are in Western markets, even down to reviews? But how can they, once they've got a good base in India, how well does all that stuff translate to the rest of the world?
Yeah, so that's something that even when I was at Warner Brothers, right? We looked at the different market, and we looked at some of the mobile titles, and along with the console and PC space. One of the things that we looked at, okay, if you are successful in India or China or Asian countries, that doesn't directly translate to success in US or even in EU, and vice versa too. So that's one area that we still have to analyze and do more deep dive. However, if you are profitable, if you have a consistent user growth, and you're looking at even just if you talk about the smartphone users, which is close to 300 or 400 million users, which is almost the same as the entire US population, right? Out of the 1.4 billion people in India, you have 400 million people who have smartphones, right? And they play some kind of video game, right? Or some kind of mobile games. So you have that much captive audience that you can be selling content, marketing them. And these are the people that look at Amazon model, Amazon.in, huge success. They pretty much wiped out many of the local retailers or local websites, right? Because when Amazon came in just a few years ago, same thing with Netflix, they started looking at the captive audience. They started promoting the content, and with their Prime membership, which is much cheaper in India than out here, they are profitable tremendously, right? So same thing with on the indie game side. If you're profitable and you're making money and you can show that traction, you can go into another Asian country, or you can come back to US and start promoting that same model. However, you have to be careful where if you're looking to promote the same game in India and then also in US, there might be some cultural localization element that you may want to tweak to. But those are going to be minor, but there are successful models that I would say again PUBG has implemented. But then you have other games that are very successful in India, but not that successful in US. But then you have also games like PUBG that are successful on both continents.
So how is PUBG different in India than it is for us in the US? What changes did they make?
Very little to none. The only thing they right, so PUBG didn't make any localization content changes. But then you look at some of the other games that they have tailored it with the cultural reference background. So sometimes they've done the skinning. So literally on the background skins and so forth and so on. Some characters that were specially built for the Indian market, but those are very few. PUBG essentially didn't do any changes like that. They partner with the right local marketing firm, local brands, and with obviously Tencent influence, they were really able to capitalize the fastest growing user market.
So we're seeing a lot of indie devs start porting their PC titles to especially Switch, but also to Android, and we're seeing a little bit of a growth in the premium side of Android games. How does this compare? I mean, are the opportunities in India solely for free to play, or are you seeing any movement on the premium side as well?
Yeah, so we looked at three different free-to-play. One is the freemium model, where there are a lot of in-game purchases. And then we also looked into the subscription-based model, along with pay-to-play models. So we looked at all four type of models. We found out that the most successful were free-to-play. However, the ad revenue, based on some of the initial pilots that we did, we quickly realized that the ad revenue, by just having the Google AdSense built in, and there are some special ads that we tailored for some of the companies, that was a huge monetization opportunity. So ad revenue alone pays far more than any initial downloads or initial app purchases that you may want to think about. So that's the recommendation I tell most of the indie developers. And as far as porting your PC games to a mobile games, this is something, again, not to sell my company services, but that's something we do. We do it extensively, right? So we take your PC title and we help you do into like so-called mobile-friendly, responsive title space. And there are a lot of elements that floats very seamlessly. There are some elements that you'd be careful. But considering there are, PUBG also did the same thing with PUBG Lite. So there is a PUBG mobile game, but then the PUBG PC, they refactored that PUBG PC, the big on PC game, into a PUBG Lite game. So the PUBG Lite is something that people obviously can play on their at their home machines, but they can also technically, if you wanted to play it on your mobile phone, you can also do that. So that's where refactoring your game from a big online or PC model to a lighter version is something that we have done it, and something we would recommend the game developers.
But don't worry about plugging your own company, Raj. We never do that ourselves either. I mean, unless you're a developer who needs a publisher or you need help on the business side of the industry, then you can give us a call. And by the way, get a ticket to our event next week. How do you, if you've got a game in India, I mean, or in the US that is premium, how much does it cannibalize your own sales? I like the idea of taking a premium game, especially for indies, when they're looking at this as ancillary revenue, truthfully, because there are very few indies who sit down and do their P&L statement. I mean, there's very few indies who do a P&L statement, but the ones that do, they don't typically factor in a lot of these markets globally, which is why I love having folks like you on here. It's like, look, India is a very viable market. The Middle East, North Africa, very viable market. But how much does it cannibalize sales if you do an ad-based version of the game in India versus a premium version in the US or Europe?
Yeah, so that's technically a highly recommended. Jay, what you pointed out in US, the ad-based model that people don't like it, right? So coming from again the dev and the publisher side, we personally don't like ad-based model. So that's something that you have to tailor. So that's why we have created this technology framework or an option where you take your premium version of the game, but when you're launching in countries like India, your sole revenue can be pure ad based, whether it's forced ads, whether it is banner ads, whether it is a rewards ads. So yeah, any those of the ad modules that you can build in. So that's something you can easily do. While you take the same content out of the emerging market or Asian market, and in the US market or even in EU, the ad-based model will be something you will have to disable. So our framework allows you to enable and disable based on the in-country deployment you will be doing.
There you go. I mean, that's it, because we operate on a global scale now. I mean, it's very much, the world is not flat. When I started doing this, we used to have to put things in boxes and send them to, countries to be sold, and we had 20 some different distribution agreements for one game. But now, with digital and downloads, as an indie dev or as any dev, you really have to think, what's the best model for this market? And it's not always going to be the very same thing. It's so if you can take your game, no matter how you're selling it here in the West, and then adapt it to do something else in other countries, go for it. The question is, so do you all do this? I mean, if a developer has a project that they want to release in India, they don't have the internal resources to do it, you all will take and do the localization, culturalization, and the tweaks that need to be done to get it to launch?
That's correct. Yeah. So that's one of our core strengths, right? So not only like we are a publisher or a partner for a local for the local publication in India, but we have tech resources. So we are more of a tech company or technology/game developer company rather than a typical just a marketing company, as people may classify us. So our name, Next Generation, Gen TM, Tech and Media, is really about technology first. How do we take your game titles, your indie titles, and really create that framework of microservices, and not to get too technical here, but create a microservices where you have an option to replace your payment system, because that's another thing that's very critical. So if you're doing in-game purchases, or if you're doing some of the elements within your indie game, then that's something you will need a local payment service provider. So with whether it's a Paytm, which is one of the provider, or we use also Stripe. So whether you use Stripe, or whether you use Paytm, or whether you use just a pure PayPal kind of a system, that's one of the things that we can enable, disable. So that's one. The second one is the localization, which is ad revenue on, which is another localization. So we'll take your game, we put that localization layer on top of it, and then we help you scale it. The good news with especially indie game developers, one of the things that they constantly ask me, where does the revenue come to? And the way we have set up the entire practice is that all the revenue comes back to US. So rather than revenue staying in India, which is something that many publishers do, or the marketers do, that local revenue stays in India. And if that's the case, then it's kind of, they can use the fund for the US development and just the life of the company. So what we have done is set up where the revenue comes directly back to US, so you can use that funds for any other reasons.
We've got a question on Twitch, but I've got a question first. What is the difference between, because everyone on YouTube is talking about PUBG Lite, what is the difference between PUBG and PUBG Lite? Is PUBG Lite just what they named the mobile version?
So they have the three versions, right? So there's PUBG, the main one, right? Then you have PUBG Lite, which is a lighter PC game. And then you have PUBG Mobile. So there are three different ones. The PUBG Mobile is the one that obviously is an Android iOS app. And then PUBG Lite is the skinny down version of the core PUBG game, or the main PUBG online game or PC game.
I didn't even know that existed.
Yep.
All right, Indy, do we have can you grab Nightwolf's question?
Nightwolf, sure. Nightwolf from Twitch says, would you say that in-game purchases are more accepted than ads for mobile games, locally or globally?
So the answer would be globally, in-game purchases are more acceptable. In India specifically, ads are more acceptable. So in Indian user will watch 5 ads about paying, right? So that's something that just culturally that we have practiced, and we also looked at some of the other Asian markets. It's a similar concept. People don't mind watching ads, whether they have to watch 5 ads to want to get started. That's something they will do. But in-app purchases is something very common in US and EU, based on our personal experience.
Are there any special restrictions on ads that developers need to be aware of for India versus other countries?
Yes, so there are definitely regulations. We have to go by, because if depending on how you are deploying the ad network, whether if you're using Google's AdSense, right, as one of the technology, Google has a lot of restriction around gambling, around violence, around sex, and so forth. So there are a lot of restrictions on what may be considered as a monetary ad revenue that may be an issue. So that's one area. Now, if you're using a localized ad network, then the restrictions are somewhat relaxed, but you still have to follow the country's ad restriction on what can be shown and what cannot be shown. Same thing with alcohol, same thing with like even cigarettes, right? So those are some of the restrictions that every country has, and depending on what you want to do, you should be able to configure those, and those are all configuration items inside our.
Interesting. So Gamer X has a question. Would you suggest making an esports team? Like, how much can an esports team earn in India?
Yeah, so that's it's funny this question being asked, because I was asked literally the same question on Wednesday. And there are some team members that are making $100,000, right? Which is a huge amount for Indian market. If you look at the average person, right, they make anywhere from $400 to $500 a month. So it's from that perspective, this is a huge amount and huge investment. This is an emerging market. This is an emerging market that we are definitely. From an investment perspective.
I mean, I think it's going to be the same everywhere. It's not hard to start an esports team. I mean, we have the technology, but it is extremely hard to be competitive and to win and to actually make money doing it.
That's correct, yeah. And this is where to start an you obviously need the talent, but the second one would be the brand sponsorship. Right now, you can easily make a lot of money because there are very few teams, and these people can generate a lot of revenue because it's an emerging market.
So, I mean, diving down that rabbit hole for a second, how do you go about finding a sponsor for a new team?
So there are a lot of partners. One is us, but there are a lot of partners that allow you to scout and do scouting on the talent and the brands. So, like for example, we can connect you to Audi, for example, or Red Bull, or even Pepsi. Right, those are the typical brands that will do a lot of sponsorship. Along with Samsung is another one, which investment. And then you have Huawei, right? Another company that does a lot of investments into the esports team. So there's influencer network. And right now, the good news is that influencer network is very limited, that you can reach out to and really get the sponsorship. But you have to find somebody who has done it before and who has the local credibility that can get you the right level of brand sponsors.
it's always interesting. I mean, go ahead. Do you have something, Andy?
Oh, I was going to say that comment there from Pac Maniac, but you addressed it. Thanks, Pac Maniac. Pac Maniac says, "Hey Jay, I've been listening to you and Indy's podcast for a while now. They're a big help in starting out as a game dev. Nice to finally see you live." That's awesome. I'm excited about that.
I'm excited about all of this stuff because it is. I mean, the reason we do these shows is to bring awareness and to teach developers about all these different avenues. And I think if you sit down, as an indie and you look at all the different opportunities that you have globally, I mean, there's still, this isn't something that's like capped. I mean, you have, countries like India with 1 billion people who are still considered developing when it comes to, mobile games. So there is so much opportunity out there. We just want to make sure that people understand it, that they know it, that they know who to reach out to find it. Raj is on our Discord now, so you can find Raj and pretty much anyone else who's ever been on our show, along with 850 some other companies on our Discord, and that's just discord.gg/indiegamebusiness. But I mean, this is fascinating. This is wonderful knowledge that we've got here. I mean, we're getting close on time, but I mean, are there any other aspects of the market or of user acquisition that you want to add here, Raj?
Yeah, so the only thing, I mean, this is a great conversation. To me, I'm just sharing my experience over the last 10 plus years being in the industry and being as a developer, and especially looking at how struggling this market is, especially for indie developers. One of the key stats that you may also know this is there are 500,000 games produced just worldwide, and out of that 500,000 games that are produced every year, more than 500,000 now, only less than 0.001% become successful, right? So this is an opportunity where, as an indie developer, you have to think outside the box, because you're competing with many of the big AAA studios. And if you want to survive and thrive, not just survive, but also thrive, you have to go into an emerging market, whether it is India. China used to be that market 5 years ago. And many companies did that, right? And they capitalized successfully, and now they're all billion-dollar companies. So this is an opportunity where you have almost 4 billion people that are hungry for US content. And I stress the word, they love US culture and content. And you can see that by just behavior-wise from Netflix and Amazon and many of the games, right? PUBG, Call of Duty, and many other games. It's just a right market for indie developers to explore and also explore at a very minimum cost, because that's something that I always focus on, is that you don't have to lose your shirt to enter an emerging market like India. You're talking about a few $1,000 trial market that you try it out, and if it works, then you double down. If it doesn't, then you obviously find another market that may be more suitable for your game.
So, I'm sorry, Raj, we've had like multiple questions come in here. Indy, if you can get to that, I'll dig out Raj's contact info, because that was actually one of the questions.
All right. Yeah, the contact info. Also, you can look on the right above his head right there, and that's his Twitter, NextGenTM. Let's see. Anakat Parker says, "I've been following the stream for a while and truly excited that esports is being considered in India. But what would be a proper guideline as a professional player?" That is a super vague question, but let's see. Can you answer that?
Yeah, that's high-level guideline, right? So one of the key element would be if you do any of the cheating mechanism, right, then you'll be banned, right? So that's something as a player you always want to follow all the rules. CS:GO is another example. Where many of the game developers and the gamers too, if you cheat, you get banned, right? Same thing with Fortnite, you get banned for 6 months or even a year or even longer. So you just have an ethical standards when you play the games, especially esports front. And then also, if people need a direct email, I'm more than happy to share my email too, which is Raj, R-A-J, nextgentm.com. So you can email me directly at that email address. I personally check every single email. And I can help you with the launch or any questions. I mean, forget about the business part. I'm here to serve the community, especially, and I love learning from the community too. So that's something. If you have a question, if you have any thought, share your ideas with me.
All right, there was another question, but I don't. It was I don't know exactly what it was. It was from Pac Maniac. Only U.S. content or Western content? I'm not sure what he was speaking about. So.
Oh, I think you're talking about content that is applicable to India. Yeah, Pac Maniac. It's actually it's both. U.S. content and stuff from the EU as well.
That's correct. Yeah, and there, as I said, there's very little localization that is needed. So that's something as an indie game developer who are also resource constrained, you can take your existing title and launch as is, because you're talking about an English-speaking country, unlike other countries like China, right? Most of the people, especially this demographics of gamers, are all speaking English, so you don't have to even do any translation. In fact, if you kept your audio and video in the US language with US accent, let's just say it that way, it's much beneficial, because then people will say, oh, I'm playing a US game. So there's this proud component that goes along with keeping the same audio, visualization, and everything else.
That's interesting. So with my Southern accent, we could totally pull off a very authentic.
Oh, you'd be like a rock star out there.
Oh, well. So realize you got here a little bit late. We covered a lot of that in here. So he's asking the best way to reach Indian users with an indie game. We're going to wrap up in just a second. Go back and watch the very beginning of this. And then if you have questions, hop in the Discord and we can absolutely answer them. But Raj, thank you so much it's early for you, and I know it's early for Indy too, but we wake him up twice a week at this
It's not that early. It's 10 a.m.
It's early-ish. So, because we're all going to be working from home, apparently, due to coronavirus.
I have no idea what that's like.
Yeah, no, me either. I had somebody on Twitter ask, they're like, what are we going to do when our kids are home from school? And I'm like, honestly, I've been doing it. My kid's 8. We've been doing this for a while, and the time you save working from home by not being in stupid meetings all day long in an office totally makes up for the time that you have to, be a dad, be a parent while they're around. So, thank you much. Anybody you have questions, like I said, he's on the Discord. If you need a ticket to our event next week, go to indiegame.business. We've got over 700 companies. You got 5 days, 24 hours a day to book meetings. You don't have to know anybody. Everybody says right there in their planning exactly what they're looking for. Mm-hmm. You use the code INDIEDEVS, INDIEDEVS, and you'll get 50% off the ticket. Raj, thank you much, man. I appreciate it. It was awesome. And you're welcome back anytime.
Oh, thank you, Jay. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Indy, for organizing.
Yeah, thank you. Just know that also this and all the other broadcasts are on anchor.fm/indie game business, so you can listen to them while you're driving to work, riding the bus, sitting at your desk. This will be up there pretty soon. And we've got some new sponsors, on their podcast, so that's pretty exciting. You'll hear that during the podcast, yeah? Anything else, Jay?
We're good.
All right. Thank you so much. See you next week. Oh, wait. We're not going to be live next week because...
we're not going to be... Good God, don't put that on me, too. We're not going to be live next week.
5 shows next week. Okay, no. We won't be live next week.
We'll be live the week after next.
Yeah. All right. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. Okay.